All I could ever be was a construction worker. We're telling our kids that they're going to be low performing. We're not giving them a vision. And we have to, through the state, provide funding for these mentor programs so these kids can have a vision. And that's not affirmative action. You're just investing in our youth and investing in our society. Thank you.
Ms. Brooks, in response to question number 9, in reference to equal access for minorities and women, you stated that you would always stand in support of equal justice laws and the support of civil rights and dignity for females and minorities. If Congress eliminates the affirmative action program, do you plan to introduce new legislation with some teeth in it to protect equal opportunity and/or treatment of females and minorities?
Thank you. One of the unique things about the United States of America is it's a melting pot. As I look around the room, there are several components that make all of us up. When you say that you represent or stand for affirmative action, that is representing each and every one of you here. Definitely, as I stand here, I am a recipient of affirmative action. I wouldn't have my education, and I wouldn't be able to stand here and talk before you if I had not walked in those steps. Consequently, I will support and work hard to make sure that it's implemented, that everyone still has a fair playing field out there. You know, for a long time, women used to be the one at home that had to rear the children. And you know, that had its ups and downs, because I know my mother stayed at home and had to rear us. And through that, she gave us a strong foundation where my father was out working. But we live in a society of change, a society that demands us to change. Consequently, when you have to change with the times, you have to make sure that that affirmative action changes. Doing that and looking at it from that particular purview, I stand here before you committed to the cause of affirmative action for women, minorities, and all people, simply because our Constitution and our country is founded on that.
Mr. Cepeda, in response to question number 7, in reference to Hispanic dropout rate, how do you propose to strengthen the relationship between school programs and industry? Are you referring to more monies from corporates to institute trade programs or more school-related on-the-job training?
There are in place already some programs, pardon me, where industry, business, has come directly to schools and helped to craft the actual courses that the students are taking, so they'll be able to more efficiently, profitably interface. They can get a job when they get through with school. They did that in cosmetology. They did that in auto mechanics. And now it's time to make sure that it's carried out and expanded to being a banker, to being a stockbroker, to being a doctor, to being an astronaut, to being a priest, a pastor, a clergyman. It has to be focused. It can be done. It has been done where it has been convenient or has been necessary by some bottom line, some national need, or by tradition. Those programs can be created just like that. This is the 1990s. This is not 1935. Ideas and the technology that we have now can develop the programs that can take our children from District 90. Now, I'm talking about District 90. I'm not going to refer to District 91 or 89 or all the other districts, but in District 90, to take our children so they can really participate in the fruits of the American dream. I am very pleased to tell you that I know lots of youngsters, including my own 2 daughters, who are having a wonderful time now that they're young adults. You know, they're legal age, they get to be 21 and over. But that is not the overwhelming situation for our children that have been coming out of District 90, especially in the 70s, 80s, especially in those 2 decades, when the dropout rate has become not simply some catchy phrase, but a plague, a catastrophe on this community. When Mrs. Garcia and her sons and me and my brothers used to play on their porch, there was no limit. That's what we must do for our children. And you are going to have to help us do it.
Mr. Deleon, in response to question number 8, in reference to equal access for minorities and women, do you think that affirmative action is working in its present form? And if not, what do you suggest to improve it?
First of all, let me say that I am a product of affirmative action. I am affirmative action. As a matter of fact, I'm going down to Houston, Texas, Saturday to receive a national award on affirmative action that has to do with setting up the Texas Alliance for Minority Engineers, which guides all kinds of minorities, including women, into technical fields. Yeah, we're not training plumbers anymore. There's nothing wrong with plumbers, by the way, because I tell you what, if there's something wrong with plumbers, my dad was a plumber, and I can't be against plumbers. There's no way in the world I'll be against with plumbers. But affirmative action, as it stands right now, and the bottom line is that we have made gains, and tremendous amount of people do not like the gains that we have made, and they have attacked affirmative action based on that. We're getting to a level field, a plane, and affirmative action has done that. Now, but on the same breath, I want to tell you that if all of us had respect for each other and honor each other, I don't think we would need affirmative action, but that's not what it is today. I think affirmative action is needed. It will be a day when affirmative action can go away, but that's not the day. The day is not today. So I'm a firm believer in affirmative action. I will support affirmative action because that, I think, in my opinion, will guide all our students, all our young energy, young talent to a better life. Thank you.
Mr. Burnham, in response to question number 6, in reference to health care for all, you state that health care in this country is not accessible to all people, and were courageous enough to say that you agreed with President Clinton's health plan, with his health reform idea. Mr. Burnham, do you have a definitive plan to change the lack of health care available?
I don't know if you saw me shake my head no, but let me clarify. I was very disappointed in what President and Mrs. Clinton came up with on health care reform. And I am reminded of an occasion in 1989 in this room when I was criticized by a congressional candidate in a special election for making certain that at every public forum like this, when we were going to be filling a new congressional seat, I made sure the issue of access to health care was asked and discussed. It's an issue I feel very strongly and passionately about. I'm not a product of affirmative action, but my wife and my lives have been determined by the lack of access to health care. And I understand that issue very well in a very personal level. I have been, for 5 years, I worked as a consumer advocate, advocating a national health care program. I want to call to your attention that this is the only industrialized country in the world. Let me say that again. This is the only industrialized country in the world, including Mexico, where people do not, at least in theory, have access to health care, and that's wrong. It is a basic need. Canada has a program that many people have criticized as a model, I think it would work in this country. We are not going to see it in this political environment that we have today. My response was to point out that sometimes people overthink a problem, and that's exactly what Hillary Clinton did. She overthought the problem and presented something that was far too complicated, such that the American public would not buy it, and it did not address all of the problems that needed to address. I am and always will be an advocate of access to health care for all. We're not going to achieve it in this political generation and without political will. The fact that I was criticized by the congressional candidate that then was elected to that office because they didn't want to deal with the issue says a lot about how far we have to go on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Saldivar, in response to question number 7, in reference to Hispanic school dropout rate, how do you plan to increase funding for additional Hispanic counselors, teachers, and principals in the schools of high Hispanic population?
Okay, well, I've looked again at after-school tutoring, which I know that is going to work, and also on the dropouts, and I haven't figured out up until now why the schools are not from 9 to 5, because what I'm seeing right now is that most of the problem that we're having with the kids is from when they get out of school so early and both of the parents are working. So that's something that we're working on to get after-school tutoring so we can keep the kids in the school grounds until the parents get home. And as far as the principals and the counselors, the money's already there. And the counselors and the people qualified are already there. They have just not been placed where they're supposed to be. And because I've gone to a lot of the elementary school to speak as representing a business, and I've gone to the bilingual classes, and they need a bilingual person, and the teachers are telling us that the Hispanics are not out there so they can hire them, and I don't agree with that. I think that the Hispanics are there, they're qualified, and there's no need to be trying to get them from out of the city or out of the state, because we have the qualified people here to be counselors, and counselor is probably what I consider the most important, because I've talked to a lot of kids that they don't want to go to the counselor because the counselor is suggesting that they go home, and that's not what a counselor is supposed to be doing. A counselor is supposed to give a positive role model and get the kids to go ahead and stay in school and not encourage them that school is not where they should be. And but the money's there, and there's enough going on right now that with NAFTA coming in to kick in, and it's very obvious that we're going to need some bilingual people to represent Texas. And when we start dealing with the Latin American countries, that the state of Texas is going to have to put more money in the education, in the educational budget, to do with the bilingual people, because the big business is going to need them. Thank you.
Mr. Hernandez, in response to question number 10, in reference to the drugs and violence, you state the method of evaluating in our schools tells our children that they are low performing and will not succeed. Are you referring to test scores or improving the educational programs? And what type of evaluation would improve self-esteem and provide quality education?
Well, let me slow down a little bit, because this is another issue that's really close to my heart. Again, as I mentioned earlier, based on a standardized test score when I was in 8th grade, I was told that I was low performing, based on my background as an immigrant, my family background, and where I lived. The TOS exam is a standardized test. District 90, every school in District 90 has a large immigrant population which by its very nature does not do well in standardized testing. And I was there with Virginia Rodriguez, principal of North High Mountain, who was in tears that she was being blamed that her school was ranked low performing. And she had only been principal there a year. She had nothing to do with that. But we're already telling these kids at the elementary school level that they're low performing based on a test they have no chance at passing. Now, based on a standardized test score, I should never have gone to law school, and I should have never passed the bar exam, certainly not the first time, and certainly not with the score I got. What we need to do is change that system and equalize the funding within the school districts. The funding within the school district is done on an attendance basis. The problem is that almost 50% of the population in District 90 rents their homes. So people move a lot. That means the first month and the last month of every school year, attendance is at an extreme low, which brings the average attendance down. Now, Jean Gutierrez gave me this information. Now, I'm not going to take credit for it. But the problem is that the schools across town have full attendance all year round. The schools in our school district, in District 90, don't. What we need to do is mandate that the attendance, formula only be done at the time when there is full enrollment. Then you can fully fund these schools that are being underfunded. Then you can provide the resources for these kids to develop their reading skills, their writing skills, which will enable them to do well on those standardized tests. Standardized tests are a good measure of likelihood for success. They're not a good measure of likelihood of failure. And we keep telling our kids that they're likely to fail. I was told that.
Ms. Brooks, in response to question number 8, in regard to the impact of immigration on education and social programs, you stated, "I will support and defend the citizens of the state." A two-part question. First, will you support legal immigrants' rights to benefits? And secondly, if immigration has a negative effect on education and social programs, would you please elaborate on how it can be turned into a positive effect?
Again, we live in one of the richest countries in the world, and there is no need for people to say that there's not enough to share. One of the main reasons people want to more or less monopolize and hoard various goods from the people that don't have it at the bottom. I definitely stand in support of immigrants that come into our country. I do realize that there is a price you pay when you do that. Anytime that you allow anybody to come into your country, when there are taxes and burdens that other citizens have had to hold up for years, there is a burden. Consequently, I would set up effective laws that will deal with that. You know, again, we're a melting pot. And when you look at this as being a melting pot, you want to include everyone. You know, inclusion is the thing that we're talking about in the schools. I work with children at risk, and all of you, as I look around the room, should know what that is. Instead of building more prisons, building more jails, we need to find a place for those children at risk. I say all that to say that definitely the immigrants that enter into our country are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of justice, just like each and every one of us sitting here as citizens.
Mr. Cepeda, in response to question number 9, in reference to drugs and violence, since a great many crimes are committed by teenagers under the age of 14, do you have some solutions in mind that would act as a deterrent?
Under 14, the news you and I have been seeing on TV, reading the newspaper, hearing on the radio, there have been more and more little children under the age of 14 committing some horrible crimes. And I think to myself that some of those little kids that are under 14 years old that are committing some of those crimes know very well what they are doing. They know what they are doing, and they do it deliberately, and they think to themselves, they've been told, and they know that because I'm under 14, the judicial system is not going to be able to do anything to me. We're going to have to get through to those children, even if it means changing some laws so that, yes, 14 and under are going to have to meet full consequences of the law. Because if they're not afraid, then we miss one point of committing a crime. Yes, there are other aspects to it, certainly. We must nurture children. We must be able to make it possible for children to be able to play on their front porch with their abuelita or their tia watching over them, and be able to be safe and not have to be shot by some drive-by shooting. We must nurture them. But children 14 and under, even the very smallest of children, understand no, understand a hug and encouragement. If it takes taking some very difficult, painful steps, I can guarantee you every little 14-year-old kid and under in this town, in this district, in this state, when they see another child, have to meet some very difficult legal penalties. They will learn from that. They will know we cannot cross this line anymore. And there are too many youngsters in our District 90 who have no one to guide them. We've got to be able to take steps there too.
Mr. Deleon, in response to question number 6, in reference to health care for everyone, what solutions do you expect to put forward to handle health care for children of indigent and low-income families?
First of all of us have been introduced to managed care and HMOs. Let me say that hopefully this is not the only alternative to our health care problems, because I think the concept of family doctors, a consortium of doctors, a specialist of doctors might work for us too. I know there's a lot of people right now that are concentrating and probably will be concentrating on this campaign to make sure that the certain HMOs get the upper hand. And they're blaming the doctors. You know, they're blaming the doctors that they need to cut their costs. You and I know that it's not totally with the doctors. This was the hospitals and the administration. That's where the cost of health care is. Now, with respect to immigrant children, I think the middle class has always had the privilege to pay. I call it the privilege to pay. So I think that any individual that uses any type of health care has a privilege to pay. A privilege to pay maybe on a sliding scale, but have a privilege to pay. And I think that would be the answer to all our problems. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I got a solution for that, because if I did, maybe I should run for president instead of a state representative. But I think one of the things that I feel that will work for us is a sliding scale. Let me give you a good example. You know, there's individuals, as a matter of fact, I'll give you a case of a director of ours that works at our plant. He paid a certain amount of money, I think it was $30,000 for a illness, and I won't mention the illness and so on. But an individual that was an immigrant almost got the same, matter of fact, got the same doctor, by the way, that he'd had at a Peter Smith hospital. and didn't pay a single cent. Now, do you think that's right? I don't think it's right. I think if the middle class is bearing the burden of taxation for health care, I think it should be spread around, whether it's the rich all the way down to the poor. Thank you.
Mr. Burnham, in response to question number 7, in reference to Hispanic dropout rate, given the fact that funds are destined to be cut off, do you plan to use the state's block grants to increase the bilingual and bicultural faculty and staff?
I think it's desperately needed, but I think you have to back up to your assumption first. I don't think that the funds are destined to be cut off. And I want, one, to just applaud everybody here for being here, and particularly the people that organize this. I think we're in a process of rebuilding and renegotiating and relooking at a lot of the problems in this country. And I think a turnout like tonight is indicative of a lot of people concerned about the threats to basic needs. I want to say something about bilingual education because that was your question. I have always passionately supported bilingual education. I first signed up on a volunteer basis to take Spanish in the 3rd grade because my mother was always talking about how important it was in the culture here. I paid as a